Will the next panel please come to the stage? I'm excited that we have a Capitol Hill expert to moderate a bipartisan panel of congressional staff who lead aviation policy in Congress. We talked earlier about the incredible bipartisan work taken to get the FAA reauthorization bill across the finish line, and taking stage momentarily are the people who work day and night to make it happen. Holly Woodruff-Lyons will lead the discussion. She is head of HWL Aerospace Policies. Holly was the Republican staff director of the Senior Counsel for the House Subcommittee on Aviation and was on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee for nearly 20 years. She was the lead House negotiator on the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2018 and has had a long and distinguished career on the Hill and with the FAA. And now she advises on aviation policy and strategy. Holly's known for asking insightful questions, so we'll let her get right to that. Please join me in welcoming Holly and her esteemed panel.
Yes. Well, thank you, Faye, for not saying I have 125 years plus experience. I appreciate that. I feel that way sometimes, but I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves, and then we'll get started. So start with you, Hunter.
Hi, Hunter Presti, Staff Director for the House Aviation Subcommittee Republican staff. Been on the subcommittee about 10 years now.
Brian Bell, Staff Director for the House Aviation Subcommittee Democratic staff, and been on the committee for almost 6 years now.
Hi, I'm Simone Perez. I'm the Policy Director for the Aviation, Space, and Security Policy Team for the Senate Commerce Committee on Republican side. I started in the House in 2010 with Holly and worked with Hunter, and then joined the Senate in 2018, briefly left, and then came back to work for the Ranking Member Cruz.
Well, I appreciate that. And yeah, I've had the privilege of working with all of these guys, and they're awesome. So let me just first start off by thanking you all for coming today and congratulate you on getting a bill done a year ago. What a difference a year makes. Yes. We were talking about drafting and negotiating and what you thought was going to be in the bill. The House was further along than the Senate, but it was a good discussion, and now we can talk about, okay, what's in the bill, or law now. So, but I personally want to thank you for all the time that you guys put in. I know it's long days and lost weekends and time away from your family, and we really appreciate all the hard work that you guys put in. So let's start off just by getting a lay of the land. Just over 4 months since the President signed the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2024, and the focus has now shifted to implementation, even though it's only been 4 months. So let's start off with how your committee intends to oversee the implementation of the law. Whoever wants to jump in on that.
Sure, I'll start. Like Rob mentioned, I think Holly mentioned yesterday, FAA is actually going to share an implementation tracker with us this time. That was not the case with the last bill until, frankly, the appropriators made the FAA share it with them. I think what's happened in the interim is that we passed the 2020 aircraft cert bill and included a requirement in there for quarterly update briefings. FAA has now gotten a lot more comfortable with that format. They understand what those PowerPoints look like, what how the Hill's going to respond to that. And I think the response from us has been very positive. I think it's been helpful for the FAA to realize that they don't have to go into a hole for 3 years and then come out with a product in response to something that everybody hates. I'm sure there will be things they do that on, but they're going to start those briefings come October. I'm sure we'll be looking at some sort of implementation hearing perhaps in the lame duck session. But even apart from the regular quarterly briefings, FAA has done a much better job than usual at giving us a call saying, hey, what did you mean by this section? What's your intent here? If we can get good enough in 6 months versus great in 2 years, which would you prefer? And so I think that's a positive change. Hopefully that momentum remains, but it's going to be a lot of work behind the scenes, and then frankly only a little bit of work in the limelight in terms of holding them accountable for implementation.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think FAA has been much better in terms of communicating with Congress and staff this time around compared to 2018 FAA Reauth bill. You know, as Hunter said, they've communicated, you know, what they intend to do. They've tried to ascertain intent, which is really, really important. As you know, I'm sure many folks here saw in the 2018 bill and maybe in 2016, 2012, you know, there were provisions that were implemented that did not necessarily reflect the intent behind that, what industry thought that was going to be. And so, you know, trying to ensure that FAA fully understands what was intended by each provision, I think is really going to be important towards implementation. And I mean, the few deadlines that have already come up, you know, they've met for the most part. And you know, I think it's a good sign for, you know, the next 6 months, the next year, 2-3 years. As long as, you know, FAA continues to communicate with us, I think we're going to be better partners with industry and be able to tell you more about what's going on with the law.
Similar in the Senate?
Yeah, I mean, so I think we'll continue to have the briefings. We actually decided to celebrate the bill being done by actually doing our own tracker because we weren't necessarily sure if they were going to do one. So we do have one. We've been tracking where they are as they give us information. But I think the communication with FAA and staff has gotten a lot better. We're not just a black hole where they can't reach out to us and ask questions. We recognize sometimes when we draft things, it's very clear to us or those who are drafting, or we're, you know, running against a really tight deadline. Sometimes FAA has a couple of questions, so we'd rather they have a conversation with us than try to do it on their own and then everyone's upset and yelling. So we'll continue to have staff briefings. Kind of hard to tell, kind of past the end of this year, what exactly, you know, it'll look like, but staff at a bare minimum will continue to have conversations. You know, we actually tried, every single time we do these FAA bills, I feel like we say, well, we're going to try to really pace out the deadlines so that we don't do everything like 6 months, 180 days, 1 year, 2 years, and the FAA just loses its mind on the 2-year anniversary. We actually tried to space them out and think through what the deadline would be appropriate for certain things. So I think we're probably, at least for speaking for my boss, we're going to be trying to hold the FAA to a lot of these deadlines. I think sometimes they're a little unrealistic and it's maybe a more messaging thing. But for this one, I think we did actually try to think through, are we being fair to the administration and the FAA, or can we kind of change it a little bit? So that's mostly what we'll be doing. There's a lot of sort of behind, you know, staff level work where we reach out in emails and they'll have conversations. We're going to frequently, the three of us and my counterparts on the Senate side are going to be on a number of calls and Zoom meetings, chatting through FAA, I foresee in the coming year.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. There's a lot of kind of behind the scenes, as you all referenced, phone calls and letters that aren't made public. So, you know, to the extent that you guys are hearing things and can share it with the committee or your impression on how things are going, it's really important to communicate with the committee staff so that they know, because you're the eyes and ears out there. I'm curious if anybody knows if implementation hearings are planned for the rest of this Congress. I know, you know, nothing's going to happen until after the election, and then it's a short window, and there'll be a lot of discussion about, you know, an omnibus or another CR or something along those lines. So any news you can share on that?
We are actively trying to figure out what our hearing schedule is for the remainder of the Congress, and I'm hopeful that aviation will get a slot where we would do an implementation hearing.
Right.
Yeah. Kind of hard to tell whether or not we'll do sort of an implementation. It hasn't quite been a year, so we might, you know, there might be a desire to wait until we've given them a year. But if all of a sudden FAA is, you know, really messing up a deadline, or we have some, heaven forbid, major issue, I could see an aviation hearing. We've had a lot of conversations about doing different aviation hearings since the bill has passed. Obviously, a lot of the current events with a particular manufacturer, but also just general concerns might prompt an aviation hearing. It's kind of hard to tell at this point.
And then how about going into the new Congress? And obviously the election will have a big impact on this, because if the House flips or the Senate flips, those that set the agenda will change. But I'm just curious, going into the new Congress, Is implementation going to be a focus? I know there's a surface bill that's coming up, and that's going to take a lot of the air out of the room for the committee. It's not so much commerce, but certainly for T&I. So just curious what just in general thoughts are in terms of oversight of implementation in a new Congress. We'll start at the other end this time.
Yeah, I mean, I with a caveat of not really sure what next Congress is going to necessarily look like, but this was an incredibly popular bipartisan bill that got through the Senate. And a number of members on our down dais have a lot of priorities in there, so I cannot imagine that there's not going to be a continued effort to oversee FAA's implementation, from the workforce issues to the consumer to the new entrants to regional air service, which is a conversation that is consistently brought up every single time we have some sort of aviation event. It's hard for me to fathom that, in whatever shape the Commerce Committee exists next Congress, that there won't be continued oversight, just given the fact of how important this was to so many people. And a lot of senators got a lot of priorities in that bill, and they have already been reaching out saying, hey, what's FAA doing with this one? What's they doing with this provision? And a couple of times it's been, well, they've got 2 years or they've got 1 year, or, so I think the pressure will continue, not just for, the chair and the ranking member, but also the down dais members are really invested and interested in what happens, so.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine the focus on implementation is going to change regardless of who wins in the House. And I'm very optimistic we will have some type of hearing at some point between now and the anniversary. I mean, look, there are things that are going to change if the House flips. I would say less so on our subcommittee. There will be some change. There will be some changes in focus, but for the most part, maybe some different topics for hearings may slightly change or maybe titled differently. But we work very much in a bipartisan manner. That's how we were able to get the House FAA reauthorization bill done and the final reauthorization bill done. And so we like that reputation, and I think that'll continue in the new year. But the focus on implementation, I don't think, is going to change regardless of who wins in the House.
You guys are going to do 3 hearings, right?
4.
Yeah. Well.
Yeah.
So, my boss, Chairman Sam Graves, is term limited as the lead Republican on the T&I committee. He is seeking a waiver for that. We'll see if he gets it. So I think it's almost regardless of what happens in election day, on election day rather, we could see changes at the T&I committee. So whoever has the gavel is, and it's just mentioned that Garrett Graves is leaving at the end of the Congress. So regardless, we'll have a new Republican at the top of the aviation subcommittee. So lots of changes. Each member is going to want to put their own personal stamp on the committee, on the subcommittee. Whether that has a partisan bent or not. I think that the commitment to ensuring that the bill is implemented the way that Congress intended is going to persevere.
Regardless. All right, let's talk about aviation workforce shortages. Obviously, that was the source of a lot of discussions here last year and over the course of the last year, a lot of media coverage of it. And from your vantage point, having heard from so many members and stakeholders, what is in the bill to address aviation workforce shortages? And any of you can jump in.
Sure, I'll take a stab at it.
And I said bill, but I meant law.
Well, I mean, so, we had over 1,500 stakeholder requests and something like that. And, hundreds of different member requests. And with every request, there would be some folks that are supportive of it, some folks that are opposed, and you just kind of have to figure out, which is more advantageous to your boss or your caucus. For the workforce development grants, in terms of bolstering that program, there was no opposition. I mean, that's why you didn't see us just double or triple it. It was quadrupled because everyone was supportive of it and everyone recognized the need to address a number of workforce challenges that the industry has faced and continues to face. So quadrupled the program, created a new program within workforce development grants to focus on manufacturing workers, and made some changes long term. Created a new career program, which Hunter can tell you more about. But I think that focus, everyone in industry has complained about workforce shortages, workforce challenges. It doesn't matter what position. There are, pilots, there are, flight attendants, gate agents. I mean, it's just there's a huge focus on it, and we probably couldn't put enough money into something like that. And so whatever we could do, I think that's one of the programs that we're going to really, really focus on ensuring FAA implements, fairly quickly on time. And I think it's going to continue to be a focus for the committee in the long term. But we may even bolster it, 2028. But that's one of the provisions I think my boss is most proud of.
No, I mean, I think kind of echoing where Brian was, the workforce development grants, that was one of the unique situations where most members were like, how much can we increase it by? And how can we increase the pool? But I think this is going to be a work in progress. Aviation isn't the only industry that's facing workforce shortage. That is the one we're focused on. I think, there are a number of different fields, from pilots, mechanics, technicians, the flight attendants, the gate agents, a number of individuals who, airlines are trying to hire, manufacturers, repair stations are all trying to get good qualified individuals. And some of it too is going to be an ongoing effort to see, we'll try to do what we did what we could in the 2024 bill. We increased the workforce development grants, but it's also going to have to be an ongoing conversation of looking through and say, are there ways in which how FAA has required certain things that can be updated or changed? There were certain reforms that I think, some of us thought would be really beneficial to kind of help with some of the workforce issues that there were concerns with, and ultimately it was a consensus product, and so couldn't quite get there. But I think that this is going to be an ongoing effort. Everyone is really focused in it. I know our subcommittee chair is from ranking member, and the chair as well are both incredibly focused on these issues. You've got Senator Duckworth, you've got Senator Moran, and I would never speak for them, but I know that they are both very interested. Senator Moran has a number of manufacturing entities in his state, so it's going to be an ongoing issue. I don't think just because we've done the 2024 bill, it's going to stop. I think there's going to be an ongoing effort to see, are there other changes or efforts that we can do to address the problem?
Yeah, I think the issues that Simone alluded to, took up a lot of the oxygen in the room, whether it was 1,500 hour, whether it was pilot age. But at the end of the day, both in the workforce title and then throughout the bill, there are a number of items and provisions that sort of address the small bottlenecks that make life difficult, and the barnacles that have grown on the regulatory system of, in order to become a technician, in order to become a pilot, you need to do, these things. And, we had a small provision updating, airman knowledge standards that, is very, black and white. It's very, pretty plain stuff. But at the end of the day, updating those to reflect, what pilots actually need to know, it makes a difference. I can remember in the 2020 bill, for instance, we had, Part 147 school reform, and directing FAA to update their curriculum. And the classic example that we kept getting was, kids these days still have to learn how to repair wooden aircraft in order to work on, a 777. Well, that's dumb, right? That prevents somebody from moving on either at all or quickly. So lots of little, quality of life issues that I think taken cumulatively along with the workforce development programs, that they're not going to change the world. They're not going to make the headlines, but they are going to make a positive difference.
Great. So I'd like to move on to small community air service. Simone has alluded to this. It's always a big issue for the Senate because they represent an entire state. And so they all have that issue. Rally for Air Service Coalition and many others had engaged in conversations on the Hill to educate Congress about the loss and disruption of air service to many parts of the United States. So I'm just curious what provisions are included in the law to address the loss or disruption of air service to our smaller communities. Right off the top of your head.
Well, EAS still exists, so that's generally. I think a lot of substantial reforms were enacted for EAS that both reflect the current reality of the program, which is that fewer and fewer communities were coming in under that $200 per passenger threshold, while at the same time recognizing that we can't treat EAS as a bottomless pit that we're going to continue to shovel money into. So try to enact reforms that work around the edges to start curbing the cost growth of the program. I think, for at least for those communities, that's I don't know, about as good as you can expect from Congress, is to at least just keep that going.
Anyone add?
Yeah, I think the AES program and making sure that we continue it for the long term, was critical. There are some changes made to the small SCASD, to focus specifically on communities that have lost service. So I think that will be helpful. But also, one of the big change, I know this is Chairman Gray's priority, a lot of new funding will go to a lot of small and rural airports. And so, obviously if just providing smaller airports with more funding is not automatically going to ensure that they have more service, but it does mean they have another tool to attract potential carriers. So, I think there are, a number of things. Oh, you can also add the workforce development grants to that too. But I think there are a number of smaller targeted kind of approaches we took. I don't think any one of them is going to solve the problem. This is a long-term problem. But we do hope it can, address some of the things we've seen that have contributed to that issue.
Yeah. No, I think EAS is the clear sort of focus as far as the bill trying to help regional communities. But I'll echo Brian. I don't think any one of us thought at the end of the day that the bill was solving the regional air service problem. It's hard to kind of point to one single sort of solution about how do you ensure that these communities continue to maintain air service. With the EAS program, we have a number of offices where they'll have essential air service. They'll have an airline that comes in, and then they'll have complications, or the airline has a hard time flying in, the community has its concerns. So we made a number of reforms to try and help with the process and give DOT a little bit more tools. But I think we're going to have an ongoing conversation about how do we ensure that these small communities don't lose that vital connection to the rest of the network. Because even if some people might initially look at EAS and say, well, it's just this 40-minute flight to a bigger, can't you just get rid of it, they'll drive or whatever. But it's the connecting flight that leads them to the next place, that leads them to the next place. And these people are taking multiple connections for a flight, but they are connected to the broader network. That's the whole thing, is it's not just point, it's an aerospace system. It's an airport system that people utilize to get throughout the country. So I think it's going to have to be one where we continue to have conversations about how do we help these small communities maintain the service they have.
Well, I know the crowd here today will like to be part of that conversation for sure, going forward and looking at solutions. I want to talk very briefly about some of the consumer protection provisions that are in the law. if anybody wants to jump in and just kind of quickly summarize or highlight some of those provisions. Oh,
Sure,
Brian.
I'd be happy to. So one of the provisions actually caused a little bit of a kerfuffle towards the very end. Cash refunds codified for the first time, codified the ability for consumers to have cash refunds and made them automatic. That was a little kerfuffle that, we needed to align that with what the DOT was already doing. So that's great. We required airlines to have policies to reimburse travelers for meals and transportation and incurred costs whenever there's a significant delay or cancellation. And we even, codified the dashboard, and to make things more transparent for travelers and ultimately more competitive between carriers. For issues like family seating, delays and cancellations, seat size, which is very important to the ranking member of the aviation subcommittee. So, I think we did a lot for consumers, much more than I think we originally thought we were going to do, and they're really important to my boss. And I know if Alice was sitting here, I know that a lot of those provisions were really important to Senator Cantwell, as well as everyone's boss here. So, I think there's a lot to be proud of in terms of the consumer title, and that's not just mention the provisions on passengers with disabilities, which was very robust, and I think is going to be probably the most robust title or set of provisions I've seen in any FAA reauth bill. So we're really hopeful for that, and we're really proud of that.
Yeah. I'll just emphasize, I think the disability subtitle that we worked on, was incredibly important, to my boss. I know Senator Duckworth was, it was incredibly important to her. But we heard from a number of folks who just say, we're waiting forever for a wheelchair, or they damage our wheelchair, and, had testimony from individuals. So we did a lot with sort of increasing the training, making sure there was more clarity about their rights, and trying to help people with disabilities actually be able to travel and not have not just been, I've been delayed or my flight's been canceled, but, a truly humiliating experience. No one should have to go through that. So I think that was something that was very important to a number of our bosses, and had a number of really good reforms in there.
All right, so I want to talk about something that's in the safety title, and it's the Enhanced Qualification Program, or EQP. Really important to many people in this room. The law directs FAA to establish the requirements for the EQP not later than November 16th, and we're all waiting to see what happens with that. So I'm curious if you guys have gotten any status update from the FAA on their implementation of this very important provision.
I think you're pretty safe taking a vacation that week.
Well, that's not promising.
We have not received an update from the FAA yet. We're looking forward to our first quarterly implementation briefing. I think that given the election and the politically charged nature of this one, it feels unlikely that the FAA is going to promulgate something on November 16th, but I'm more than willing to be surprised. I'd be thrilled to be surprised. I don't know, have you guys heard?
No, we haven't heard anything. Obviously, this was from an amendment that was introduced from Senators Thune and Sinema that was very important to them. The initial version caused some challenges on the Senate side, but we managed to get to a good place with a compromise that everyone could, thought, okay, moves the needle forward. I haven't heard anything from the FAA, but I would imagine that there's going to be significant interest about what are you doing. I think there was a strong desire to make sure the language was as clear as possible, and give the FAA, guidelines and parameters for what exactly was people were looking for. So we'll wait to see, but interested to see sort of in the October update what that looks like.
All right, fair enough. You guys have kind of alluded to this, which I, as a former staffer, am appreciative, but there was a decision by the U.S. Supreme Court recently, Loper Bright Enterprises versus Raimondo, that overturned the Chevron deference. And Chevron deference is when there's a law that's not clear and there's a lawsuit, courts are to defer to the agency in their interpretation of that unclear law. That's gone now. And it's all about what was congressional intent. So if a rule is challenged and it goes to court, the court has to look at the record and what was it that Congress wanted the agency to do, not what the agency decided or interpreted the law to mean. So based on this recent decision, I'm curious if you guys have seen any impact of Loper. And it sounded like maybe there was a little more outreach. So from your perspective, how do you think Loper is going to impact the rulemaking process and FAA's interactions with the committee and with Congress going forward?
Yeah, I think, to be clear, Congress never writes an unclear law. We're always perfectly...
Well, no, sometimes intentionally Congress writes an unclear law.
Then we're, intentionally as clear as we want to be. But whether or not it's Loper that's had the effect on how FAA is reaching out to us, or if it's I don't know, maybe they woke up on the right side of the bed that day when we asked. But I think it obviously will have an impact on maybe not so much FAA regulations to some extent, certainly DOT regulations. And consumer regulations that aren't necessarily grounded in statute or that rely a little bit too heavily on, unfair and deceptive standard. That was established by Congress back during the CA days, and so whether or not DOT is going to be able to rely on just unfair and deceptive to, continue to promulgate, new consumer regs that had never really been contemplated by Congress, or, certainly hearing about some that we considered in conference and ultimately, did not adopt. I think that's where Loper is probably going to play the largest role in aviation. Not to say that FAA won't, go too far on something that can't be challenged. But I think there's going to be some more caution for a little while until people kind of the case law settles out about, okay, we don't have Chevron. What are the tests that we can apply?
Yeah, I think a lot of that still has to play out. Professionally, I guess we should be happy that FAA is going to do what we tell them to do. But you made a really good point, Holly. There are times when Congress intentionally makes things vague and ambiguous. And that usually has to do with a compromise done, in conference or to get a bill done. I mean, believe it or not, these two are really good negotiators. And the only way I was able to get some of my boss's priorities done is because we were each betting that FAA was going to take the interpretation that we wanted. And we didn't know. And so we were both willing to, go with whatever language that we thought we can get away with. And so that's going to be harder to do. And I think it's going to make negotiations a little bit harder. Hopefully not. We'll see. We'll see how, a set of cases plays out. But yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be a challenge. It is good, and I do see it as a positive step that, FAA is coming to Congress more. I don't know if that's a result of Loper or not, but if it is, I think it's really good. Continuing communication with Congress and staff is going to be better just in terms of creating a better product.
Yeah, ditto.
Ditto.
I remember we would sometimes be ambiguous because we wanted to cause FAA not to know what to do. and to kick the can. So yeah, and that I do think Loper's going to change congressional behavior as well. And it's going to be that much more important to be very clear and to really be clear in what the intent is. And that's going to be super important for those interested in whatever issue it is, to get up there. And even now, if there's provisions that FAA is going south on and you don't think it's they're following congressional intent, you need to be up talking to the Hill and letting them know. So it's just, I do think Loper really will change the landscape in a lot of ways, both good and bad, as most legal decisions do. So let's wrap up with kind of looking ahead. What do you anticipate Congress and your committee to do for the rest of the year? We touched on that a little bit. And then just the outlook for the next Congress, to the extent that you're willing to venture what that might be. So whoever wants to go first.
Sure. So for us, we're sprinting through the finish. We talked about implementation. We marked up a counter UAS bill that has folks riled up, and I think the Senate has some interest in figuring out what a counter UAS bill or law could look like. So we'll see if those conversations go anywhere. There's typically been an end of year package that includes some odds and ends. Whether or not aviation will play in that space this time around, I think is still to be determined based off of the election. I think the speaker said that we're not going to do a Christmas time Omni this year. Whether that means we do a December 19th Omni because it's not Christmas, we'll see. But I think there's a lot of really interesting issues that are still percolating. GAO came out with a report confirming what everyone's known for the last 20 years, that FAA's air traffic control system is somewhat decrepit, and so we'll be looking into that, following up with that. But I think next Congress, you alluded to this earlier. We have a highway bill authorization coming up. The infrastructure bill, IJA, runs through next Congress. So I think that will probably be the focus of T&I and sort of the transportation focus of the Congress. But aviation has a small part to play in IJA. To the extent that IJA is being reauthorized or reconsidered, we'll have a role to play in that, but hopefully we'll have a little bit of a quieter Congress in the 119.
You just jinxed yourself, 100%.
Well, one, I want to say thanks, Hunter, for agreeing to extend the aviation provisions in the next IJA bill. We really appreciate that. Yep. But no, I agree with most of what Hunter said. I mean, we only have 6 weeks left in this Congress, so not a ton to do. But at the end of every year, there's always a rush to get a number of different things added on to either the NDAA or Omnibus, and I think counter UAS is going to be one of those provisions that I think we're going to try to get over the finish line. I think next Congress, I think it, knock on wood, hopefully it's a little bit quieter for aviation, but aviation's never quiet.
No.
There really isn't. There's never been more than a month or two where something big in aviation is not in the news. So really a week or two. So there are going to be things that we're not even thinking about that are going to be a major focus next Congress. So we're just going to get ready for that. But I think we are looking forward to getting back at that pace of focusing on implementation, focusing on oversight, and working with industry to ensure that those provisions are being implemented and implemented in the way that you all are feel is acceptable or reflects the intent behind the provision.
Yeah, I mean, for Senate Commerce, hearings and official, committee activities is kind of TBD at the moment, but, NDAA is around the corner. Got to get through that.
What's NDAA stand for?
Sorry, National Defense Authorization Act, which I don't know how they do it every single year, but somehow they pull together these 1,000-page bills, and every single year well, it didn't make it in the FAA bill or didn't make it in that, so maybe we're going to try. It's a moving vehicle.
They have bigger staff. That's how they.
Yeah. Having a number of former coworkers over there. Yeah. So that's always a moving target for people to try and get something that they would like. If there's some sort of end of the year package, Omni, whatever, that could include a number of aviation. It could include some aviation things. Who knows? Usually it has to be pretty consensus. So we'll see what that looks like. Over on the commerce side, our jurisdiction is a little different. We have FAA, but we also have all of the commercial space. So we have FAA, AST, but we also have NASA, and we have TSA under our purview. So those are areas that we also focus on, that we hear a lot about. So beyond sort of the traditional continued oversight of the FAA, reach out to TSA. Commercial space is a huge issue that we hear a lot about. We'll continue to sort of conduct the oversight that we need to. And next Congress, hopefully, I'm not going to say the Q word, because the last time someone said that in the 2018 bill, less than a month later, we had the first MAX, and then a tragedy, and then the next one, and then it was COVID. And I blamed that one staffer completely for all of those events.
It wasn't any of us, though, right?
No,
Okay.
it was a certain individual where he was like, we were going to just do brunch, we'll take long lunches, we'll see our families, and then we didn't see our families, or we did. We were all stuck in houses. But so I think we'll continue to, conduct good oversight and watch and make sure that the FAA is doing what it needs to do. And sometimes we have to go back and say, hey, we thought that this was going to work, and it's not. But the nice thing is, usually I think both committees, respectively, are really work well together and get legislation through. So I think regardless of sort of how things turn out, hopefully legislation churns through, and we can kind of move the needle forward on a number of issues.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, so the TSA needs to be reauthorized, and that'll probably be a big focus in the next Congress. And the taxes expire in 2025. Not these committees, but that will take a lot of energy out of Congress as a whole. Those are big events. So I'm gonna thank these guys again for coming so early in the morning, and for doing such a great job on the bill and getting it done. You surprised me, but you did it. I didn't think you'd get it done before August, and you guys got it done in May. So congratulations to you, and thank you again for coming this morning and for all your hard work. Appreciate it.